2nd and 7, Leary has tons of time into the end zone. Caught! Miraculously, Carter!
If you want to understand America, to truly feel its history, its cultures and rivalries, going to a college football game is a great place to start. The sport is overflowing with tradition, and it's regional, more so than almost any other cultural institution. In a lot of ways, the game is a mirror held up to America itself. But some folks, especially Asian Americans, haven't always seen themselves in that reflection.
Look, there's limits of pure representation, certainly, but I think it influences in a huge way who feels like they have the ability to be involved in sports.
A handful of high-profile figures in college football are helping to change that perception by adding new stories to the history of the sport. But that history is more complicated than we thought.
You can see that he obviously stands out from the rest of the class. He is obviously of Asian descent. And to see him in the football picture from 1895, it was just kind of mind-blowing.
I'm Anissa Khalifa. This is The Broadside, where we tell stories from our home at the crossroads of the South. This week, the changing face of college football and how an incredible discovery in North Carolina is challenging what we think is possible in sports.
Good morning. Good morning. Good to see you all. Thank you so much for coming out to Davidson College. Happy holidays to everyone.
This is a scene that has played out thousands of times in the history of college sports. Late last year, the school, located in the Charlotte suburbs, announced the hiring of their new head football coach.
We wanted someone who was a great person first and a great coach second. I'm proud to say there are many of...
As you can hear, the press conference was a pretty unremarkable event filled with glad-handing and cliches. But the announcement at Davidson was also truly historic. And that's because their new guy is the first head coach of Indian descent in college football history.
And with that, I'd like to introduce the 29th head coach for Davidson College football, Saj Thakar.
I just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you guys for that kind introduction as well.
He was a bit of a risk. He's a younger guy. I think he's only 34 or 35 years old, but somebody that Davidson was very excited about. My name is Shahan Jayaraja, and I'm a national college football writer at CBS Sports.
Shahan has covered the sport from his home in Texas for over a decade. So I reached out to him to get his take on this and some other fascinating developments in the college football landscape. It's a culture where Asian Americans make up only a tiny slice of the pie. And I mean, to that point, you and I are both Asian Americans who spent a lot of time in southern states where football is a big deal. And that's an experience that doesn't get a lot of mainstream representation, right?
Back when I first started, I'm one of the few national Asian college journalists in the field. There really almost weren't any Asian American athletes at the time. I remember just being around the state of Texas. I recall two in the first probably 5 to 7 years that I covered college football.
That's 2 players in the entire state of Texas. But recently, Shahan says that has started to change across the country, on the field, but especially on the sidelines.
One thing that I think has really expanded this is you're starting to see more people on the football operations side who are Asian American than ever before. You're starting to see more people on the training side than ever before. There are multiple teams now actually that have general managers or key personnel people that have Asian American backgrounds. And you're slowly starting to see as well the emergence of a handful of Asian American coaches.
That includes Saj Thakar at Davidson. But without a doubt, the biggest name is Notre Dame head coach Marcus Freeman, whose mother is from South Korea.
he very quickly has turned into one of the best coaches in college football. During the 2024 season, he led them to the national championship game, their first national championship game since 2012. He won the first playoff games in the history of Notre Dame as well.
Snap and hold are good. The kick is good! Notre Dame has won the Orange Bowl, and Marcus Freeman is taking them to the championship game.
This is Notre Dame. This is one of the most traditional, most conservative, you can say, programs in all of college athletics. Obviously, a huge history to the Catholic Church, a history that dates back to the 1930s and 40s when you talk about their history of college football. And he's become a beloved figure at Notre Dame, but also outside of it.
All coaches, minorities, black, Asian, white, it doesn't matter. Great people continue to get opportunities to lead young men like this. But this ain't about me. This is about us. And we're going to celebrate what we've done because it's something special.
And Shahan has seen Asian American representation in sports journalism and broadcasting improve, too.
2 or 3 years ago, I remember it was one of the coolest things for me. I was covering a college football game with 2 other Asian American writers, and an Asian American was actually broadcasting the game, Anish Shroff, for ESPN.
Wow.
That's just not something I would have conceptualized before.
To Shahan and a lot of people who follow the sport closely, this all seems relatively new. And that's what makes a recent discovery in North Carolina so stunning.
So it was really a fully a happenstance kind of thing.
This is Tim Peeler. He's the former managing editor of the North Carolina State University athletics website and pretty much the school's unofficial sports historian.
I was doing some research, digging into some old newspaper files on newspapers.com. I was writing a story back in 2010 about the NC State's history of playing games at the state fair. And so I was just getting into a rabbit hole. NC State happened to play VMI in at the Cotton States and Exposition down in Atlanta. I was reading the game coverage of it, and it was just talking. NC State got pummeled, by the way, in that game. It was not a great showing for them. But just in the game coverage, it mentioned Sugishita's appearance in the game, and they called him NC State's great Japanese quarterback. And I'm like, what?
That shock you heard in Tim's voice is because he was reading an article in the Atlanta Constitution newspaper that was written in 1895. And he immediately knew that he had stumbled upon something remarkable.
And then I just started going back into our own interior files at NC State and looking up who this person was, how he got to NC State, which seemed completely out of the blue, and why he played football.
Coming up after a break, the unbelievable story of Tesak Sugishita and what it means today. If you ask sports historian Tim Peeler what NC State football is known for, the conversation inevitably turns to quarterbacks.
Russell Wilson, who played in 2 Super Bowls and won one of those for the Seattle Seahawks. Roman Gabriel, who was college football's first Asian American All-American player. Jamie Barnett, who was the all-time leading passer in school history until Phillip Rivers came a year after he graduated to break all of those records.
I'll confess right now that I'm not a football person, but even I know that the quarterback basically leads a team. They control the tempo of the game and are often responsible for most of the scoring. And that long lineage of talented Wolfpack quarterbacks, it pretty much starts with Tesak Sugishita. So tell me about him. Who was he? And how did he end up in North Carolina?
He came here as part of Japan's reopening to the West, which happened in the 1850s. They started sending students out, only like 12 or 13 students out to American universities to learn things like agriculture and engineering. NC State opened in 1889 as North Carolina's land-grant university, land-grant college at the time, and its primary focus was agricultural and mechanic arts education. And so this just happened to be one of the schools that the government of Japan sent one of its students to. He showed up here in January of 1895 and was integrated into the college culture at the time, which is vastly different than what the college culture and college football culture is of today.
How was it? I mean, can you tell me a little bit about how it was different?
It was they just played on an open field. They did not have standard regular measures. They didn't have, touchdowns were 5 points. The quarterback was not the focal part of the offense at the time.
So as a student who came to study civil engineering, how did he end up playing football?
So the thing about football in the 1890s is that almost no one who came to college knew how to play the game. It was one of those things where you got to college, you learned about it, and then you just took it up. There was no high school football at that time. Or if there was, it was a very rudimentary thing.
To give us a little context of the time, I mean, were there any other players of color on the NC State football team at that time?
No, because NC State, because of General Assembly guidelines at the time, did not have its first black students until the 1950s.
Yeah, so given that NC State was not desegregated until the 1950s, how is it possible for this Japanese student to be not just attending, but be in such a prominent position as the quarterback?
Right. And that's what immediately attracted my attention to it. Is this seems too surreal to be possible.
Tim says that Tesaku was actually the first international student to ever graduate from NC State. He doesn't actually know how this happened in the deeply segregated North Carolina of the 1890s, or how Tesaku was treated, but he does know that the young man's story was incredibly rare, and not just because he played for a Southern school. How many Asians or Asian Americans do we know of that were playing college football in the 19th century? Do you know of any others?
I do not know of any others. Okay. I have asked around. I've researched newspapers, archives, lots of different football sources to try to find that out. And I would love to hear about it if there were others.
We reached out to multiple historians, and no one could think of a single Asian or Asian American athlete before this, in any sport. What happened when Tesaku went back to Japan?
So he ended up in the silk trade along the Silk Road in Japan, China, or all of the Asian countries who dealt in that. He did use his degree to become a figure in that trade back at that time.
Now, I wish I could tell you that this story had a happy ending, that this young man went back to his homeland and had a long and fruitful career. But unfortunately,
he had a very sad life based on the research that I had. He lost touch with his NC State folks. A couple of his teammates from those days in the 1890s decided at one of their reunions, early class reunions that they had, that they wanted to find out about what happened to him. So Sid Alexander wrote the Japanese embassy or the American embassy in Japan to see if they could track him down, and they did. And it was pretty interesting that those letters were on file at NC State's archives. But they found him just about the time that he had been laid up at his home in Tokyo because of the effects of alcoholism. And just about the time they were able to reconnect with his nephew, both his nephew and Sugishita were among the 140,000 people who were killed in the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923.
Oh, so that was kind of the end of his story as far as we know.
As far as I know, that's to all verifiable information that we have is what happened to him.
So this is a very old story, but what do you think his legacy is, if he has one?
NC State was created in 1887 by the General Assembly of North Carolina to serve the people of North Carolina, but to open its doors and bring people to Raleigh to learn about agriculture and mechanic arts or engineering. And to me, he serves as the earliest example of how we did that with the international community by bringing someone from Japan here to play football, to get an education, and then go, as we like with all of NC State students, to go back to their own communities and try to improve and elevate where they came from after coming to NC State for an education.
There's a lot we don't know about Tesak Sugishita, details that are lost to time, like how he felt about his time in North Carolina, why he chose to play this weird, new American sport, what exactly happened when he went back home. But we do have a couple more clues to his life here. Just before he left the studio, Tim pulled out something incredible.
One of the fascinating things is being able to see what a football team looked like in 1895.
Tim showed me 2 photos he unearthed of Tesaku from the 1890s, one with his team and one with his graduating class.
You can see that he obviously stands out from the rest of the class. He is obviously of Asian descent, and he is wearing a suit of the day with a bow tie and a stiff collar, hair slicked back a little bit.
Looking distinguished to suit the occasion.
Looking distinguished in the day, but not necessarily a picture of joy. And to call up the graduating class of 1898 and see him standing there, and to see him in the football picture from 1895, it was just kind of mind-blowing to be able to happen across that, because this entire history was happenstance. I happened to see something in the Atlanta paper. I happened to research it. Otherwise, that'd probably all be lost to history.
Stories like this are precisely why reporter Shehan Jayaraja fell in love with the sport in the first place.
College football is the story of people and places. You might cover the Dallas Cowboys, and yes, it's a Texas team, but it's not really, right? Like it's a big brand that people care about all over the place. If you cover Texas Tech University, it's a story of West Texas. It's a story of Lubbock. It's a story of a place and a time and a people. And I think that getting to see our community become part of the broader story of sports, I think is really gratifying. I think it also influences in a huge way who feels like they have the ability to be involved in sports, whether it is from the perspective of course, being a player or a coach, but also I think it changes the way that people are watching the sport as fans. It connects with the culture outside of the sport, I think, in a different kind of way. When people are watching these games and seeing people on the sidelines involved in the sport and welcomed in the sport that maybe haven't been before.
Before this past week, had you ever heard of Tesak Sugishita, who was this Japanese civil engineering major at NC State University from 1895 to 1898, who was the quarterback of the football team?
I had not. I was shocked, certainly, to know that a Japanese player was playing college football at that point. But I think that this is one piece that really strikes me, right? Is there is a much broader and more complex picture of Asian America than I think people realize. Again, the idea that a quarterback at NC State in the 1890s traveled from Japan to North Carolina and played college football is just insane. But there are so many stories like this that we don't know, that we're still learning, that we're still uncovering. I think it only reinforces, right? The stories are so much deeper, more complex than people realize.
Shehan Jayaraja is a college football writer for CBS Sports. If you'd like to check out his work, we've dropped a link in this week's show notes. There, you can also find the incredible article, Quarterback of the Rising Sun, by NC State historian Tim Peeler. And a special thanks this week goes out to Eric Moyen and John Thielen, authors of College Sports, A History, for doing some lightning-fast fact-checking on our behalf. This episode of The Broadside was produced by me, Anissa Khalifa, and our editor, Jared Walker. The rest of our team includes producer Charlie Shelton Ormond and executive producer Wilson Sayre. The Broadside is a production of WUNC North Carolina Public Radio and is part of the NPR network. If you have feedback or a story idea, you can email us at broadside@wunc.org. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a rating, a review, or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll be back next week.